BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNid88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the Teespring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin.
Okay, hello everybody. Today is Wednesday, and on Wednesdays I've been doing a regular segment about Jack the Ripper, perhaps the world's most famous unsolved murder mystery. But just a couple of quick announcements and reminders before we begin. The first is that there is a new set of videos that are now available on this channel, and they're on the YouTube Shorts page. I've been doing some 1-minute true crime book reviews, once again on the YouTube Shorts page here on Black Box Online Radio. And I've started out with the Zodiac Killer books, although I have a couple out about the case of JonBenet Ramsey as well, and in the future I'm going to work in some of the other titles from true crime stories from various cases all across the board. And a great way to support all of these efforts is to go over to BuyMeACoffee.com, BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNed88. That allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. But an even easier way to support this channel is just to hit the like button and subscribe. If you listen to the regular episodes about Jack the Ripper that come out on Wednesdays and you're not subscribed to this channel, I invite you to do so you can follow along with all of these true crime discussions, and share something in the comments section down below. If you're curious about the Ripper case, feel free to write something in the comments section. Mostly anything related to the case is welcome, so please feel free to do so. And right now I would like to give a shout out to Brian Mead, who sent something into the email address blackboxonlineradio@aol.com, and he sent me the YouTube links to Martin Fido's radio program Murder After Midnight, the episodes on Jack the Ripper. And I've been going through those, and the first episode focuses on 3 crimes that could be connected to the Ripper. 2 of them are unconfirmed, and 1 of them is confirmed. The confirmed one would be the murder of Polly Nichols, which took place in August of 1888, August 31st. But the first one is the murder of Emma Smith. And I had really expected that I would be doing an episode on the murder of Emma Smith as a standalone in this Jack the Ripper series, but I have to be very honest with you guys. The reason why this episode isn't called Jack the Ripper, the Murder of Emma Smith is I am not seeing an ounce of a Ripper connection. Emma Smith has her place in history as being the first victim in the Whitechapel murders, and I can completely understand that. She was murdered on April 4th of 1888, that's when she passed away. The attack actually took place on April 3rd. Really, the events would have started on April 2nd, which, as I understand, was Easter Monday, and then that's the night that she went out. And then in the early AM hours of April 3rd of 1888, a woman named Emma Smith, who was 45 years old at the time, who was a prostitute, was attacked near the Whitechapel Church. And the reason why I'm not seeing an ounce of Ripper connection to this case is because the way her attack has been described as a vicious sexual assault. And in SVU terms, they would be talking about penetration with a foreign object, and the object was most likely a metal bar or something similar. And then Emma Smith completely is able to get away from this. I mean, she's badly injured, but one of the real discrepancies with the murder of Emma Smith that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to people is from where she was attacked to the boarding house where she was staying was about 300 meters, but it took her several hours to make that journey. And to be very honest with you guys, I don't think that there's anything bizarre about that at all. If someone had been viciously attacked, especially in the early AM hours, probably with very little energy, it's quite possible that she just passed out and lost consciousness as she was stumbling along this 300-meter journey. That would also account for why she wasn't spotted by witnesses, and they're even saying that there should have been PC cops in the area. But again, if someone has just passed out in some type of dark alcove, I think that would also make sense. But Emma Smith doesn't completely pass away until April 4th of 1888, so she is able to give testimony in the hospital as to what had happened. She doesn't provide a lot of descriptions of her attackers, but she says, firstly, just that. There were multiple attackers, and that the youngest was perhaps around 18 or 19. I've seen the number 18 and the number 19 in multiple sources, and I would like to cite Jack the Ripper Tour, of course. I love their stuff, jacktheripper.org, and even Jack the Ripper Map, as well as the YouTube channel Crash's Murder Map, which has provided some very good things on the Ripper case. But ultimately, this appears to have just been a different set of perpetrators altogether, and when discussing a type of Jack the Ripper connection, some people might believe that Emma Smith was murdered by Jack the Ripper. I'm not seeing an ounce of Ripper connection, so that's what I would like to begin with, though. And then moving on to another crime that is going in the opposite direction on the belief scale, because most people accept that the murder of Emma Smith was not Jack the Ripper, and she was a woman who was murdered in the vicinity of the other crimes, months before, mind you. The Ripper doesn't really take shape until August of 1888. But there's another crime that happened, and that was the murder of Martha Tabrum. And I'm going to have to do a standalone episode on her case, because Martha Tabrum's murder is heavily believed by many to be the first crime of Jack the Ripper, and she was 39 years old when she was murdered, and she was stabbed 39 times. I thought that was such an odd coincidence, but another odd coincidence is that Martha Tabrum's alias that she used, and she was using at the time, was Emma Turner. So you have Emma Smith, who's murdered in the spring of 1888, and then Martha Tabrum, who's using the alias Emma as well, or that the alias Emma, period, was murdered in August of 1888. But again, there's some very odd issues surrounding the death of Martha Tabrum. According to that YouTube channel I just cited, Prash's Murder Map, Martha Tabrum was stabbed 39 times, yet the witnesses who should have been in the vicinity, or the people living in the vicinity, did not hear her scream or anything of the sort, and there were two explanations provided. How could someone be stabbed 39 times and then not make a sound? One could be that she was intoxicated, and Martha Tabrum was known to have been a heavy drinker, and that she was completely passed out, and then some maniac or some client that was mad at her for some reason started stabbing her. Or it could also be that the witnesses just made the story up and they lied and they didn't want to tell the truth because they were afraid that someone would retaliate and that the newspapers at the time would publish the names and the addresses of witnesses so it could easily be traced back to them. So they just said, we didn't hear anything, when they may have actually heard more about the murder of Martha Tabrum. But one reason why, at first glance, I absolutely said that the murder of Martha Tabrum was not a victim of Jack the Ripper was she stabbed 39 times. But the women who were murdered by Jack the Ripper, Polly Nichols, Annie Chapman, Liz Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Kelly, were murdered in a different way. With the exception of Liz Stride, 4 of the 5 victims were mutilated. Their throats were cut. I mean, Liz Stride's throat is cut, but her body was not mutilated. And the women were very badly mutilated, especially the final victim, Mary Kelly. And when I heard that there was this pre-Ripper murder of Martha Tabrum, like the first time I ever heard her story, and it was like, okay, she was viciously stabbed 39 times, I simply thought, well, that's not the same thing at all. That is just a completely different type of psychopathology. That's just a completely different type of MO, and that just seemed like a different crime altogether. However, upon reading up on Jack the Ripper and listening to other sources and listening to what other people have to say about the crime, it's the theory that this was the Ripper getting ready for the Autumn of Terror. This was a less experienced Jack the Ripper, someone who had a lust for blood, but was testing the waters, more or less. And the expression that I was about to use, that I was even trying to avoid, but I'll say it anyway, is the Ripper was just starting to get his knife wet with the murder of Martha Tabrum. And here is something that is a little bit more theoretical. When we've looked at certain Jack the Ripper suspects, it's possible that somebody had a deteriorating mental state, and their fits of mania were becoming more and more intense, and their dangerous behavior was becoming more and more intense. And that's why you would have someone being stabbed 39 times in August of 1888. And then once you get to November 9th of 1888 with the murder of Mary Kelly, she is just absolutely torn to shreds and mutilated beyond recognition. And I wanted to focus on three specific crimes that could have been attributed to Jack the Ripper because I'll just share one final thing that I heard on Martin Fido's Murder After Midnight program, and that relates to the murder of Polly Nichols. So, as we said, firstly starting out in April, then going to early August, the events of August 6th in 1888 with the murder of Martha Tabrum, and then August 6th and 7th, excuse me, and then over to August 31st with the murder of Polly Nichols. Very famously, the first person to see Polly Nichols' body after she has been murdered and mutilated is Charles Lechmere. But at the time of the program's recording, he's still referred to as Charles Cross, and I don't even think his name would have been revealed as Charles Lechmere at the time, but Charles Lechmere is the first witness to seeing Polly Nichols, and Martin Fido was also telling a story that is somewhat disputed by the House of Lechmere channel, and that is that this guy named Charles is walking to work, and he sees a tarpaulin on the street, and he thinks that he can salvage it, so he walks closer, and upon examination, it's the body of Polly Nichols. So then, he hears the footsteps of somebody else coming, and that's actually another witness named Robert Paul. So what Charles Lechmere does is he retreats quickly, and then once Paul comes into sight, he then joins him and then walks to the body of Polly Nichols together. That's what was shared on Martin Fido's program. As I said, those events were disputed by the House of Lechmere channel, but I have a very big wavering response to Charles Lechmere as a Jack the Ripper suspect, because the people who think that Charles Lechmere was Jack the Ripper are just like, that is suspicious behavior. And furthermore, they say that the story about him trying to take the tarpaulin because he wants to salvage it for himself is just made up. It's like they can accept, okay, he saw something on the street, and then people are adding in their own fictitious elements to the story. But there's this whole thing about he's present by the body, then he hears somebody coming, so he retreats, and then he walks back up. I mean, even I thought that is extremely suspicious behavior, and Charles Lechmere is indeed a suspect, and not only that, perhaps at the time of this recording, he is one of the prime suspects in the Ripper case, and as I said, I have a wavering response. Sometimes I think he looks extremely guilty, other times he looks less and less guilty. But who would be the suspects in these other crimes? With the murder of Emma Smith, almost certainly she was murdered by a London street gang, and as I understand, these street gangs would try to blackmail prostitutes. Some of them may have even been prostitutes for the gangs themselves, that the certain members of the gangs would be acting as a type of pimp or someone who was controlling the woman, and then they were when they didn't do what the gang wanted, they were attacked. Now, this is important for another reason, because this becomes the entire foundation of the Ripper hoax theory. I was over on one YouTube channel that some of you like and some of you don't. It's called the Stones Unturned podcast, and it's actually been renamed The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, which is also the title of the book by its host, Thomas Henry Horan, and he talks about how there was no Zodiac Killer, but he also said on a recent episode, there was no Jack the Ripper. He is a supporter of the Ripper hoax theory, and he was promoting Tom Westcott's books, which I have to read in the future, but it's the idea that the women in Whitechapel in 1888 were not killed by a single serial killer, that they were murdered by the London street gangs, and then the newspapers were writing articles making it seem like there is a single killer, and this is aided by one journalist from the Star, Frederick Best, who would have allegedly forged the Dear Boss letter and the Saucy Jackie postcard, and the From Hell letter would have been forged by a medical student who had access to a kidney, cut a kidney in half, and then mailed that in with the From Hell letter preserved in an alcoholic type solution. Okay, when I was first hearing this stuff about the Ripper hoax theory, I was like, I mean, it makes perfect sense to me. That's why Jack the Ripper was never solved. And I was reading the Mammoth Book of Jack the Ripper, and there are all these different theories. Like, it has, like, there are different types of theories that are explored in that book. And people are like, absolutely, multiple perpetrators for sure. I mean, these crimes are committed this way, and these crimes are committed that way. And you guys in the comments section encouraged me to think about things in a different way. Number one, even if you had somebody writing letters taking credit for crimes that he didn't commit, there still could have been a single serial killer. I mean, that just could have been a journalist was following the story and wrote the letters. Number two, the London street gangs did not and would not commit crimes like the vicious mutilations of Jack the Ripper, not only murdering the women but mutilating them. As a case in point, the murder of Emma Smith. She is viciously attacked and she's sexually assaulted with an object, but that seems like more consistent behavior from a gang that is trying to blackmail a prostitute, as opposed to the vicious crimes of Jack the Ripper, where these women are being genuinely cut apart, not only getting their throats slashed. I mean, Catherine Eddowes had her kidney cut out, and as I previously said, the murder of Mary Kelly, but also something else that I haven't talked about too much on this channel, and that is that Jack the Ripper would cut out the uterus of some victims. So that is a very different way of committing the murders. Very different indeed. So the murder of Emma Smith, I can accept that that was done by a London street gang, but I do have to point out that the canonical Ripper victims from Polly Nichols all the way to Mary Kelly are committed in a very different way as opposed to that. Now with Martha Tabrum, I'm slowly leaning more and more toward a Ripper possibility, not quite there yet, and as I understand, Martha Tabrum was, again, she's using the alias Emma Turner, but she was married to somebody who had the last name Tabrum, Henry Samuel Tabrum, and he goes on to become a Jack the Ripper suspect himself, and that is one thing that I'm going to have to explore. There's a book out on that by an Australian writer. I would love to read that one, and I'm quite curious as to how he's going to compose that particular theory. But I also want to let you guys know that in the future, I'm going to be doing a more general Jack the Ripper segment, because on Mondays I do something called the Zodiac Killer News Report, where I talk about different pieces of info about the Zodiac Killer. It was just a name. I just wanted to make it clear that it's not something that's coming from the comments section. It's just pulling material from any source and assembling it in together into a report. And I'm planning to launch a Jack the Ripper report for this Ripper Wednesday segment in the future. And one of the reasons is I can talk about many different subjects at once, because there has been a lot of talk in just the comment threads about some news that happened a couple months ago, and I even did a direct response to this, and that is the revelation of a cane that has an alleged composite of Jack the Ripper, and they believe that the cane is the Jack the Ripper suspect, Dr. Alexander Pedachenko, a Russian Jack the Ripper suspect, and I did an episode on that, just with the same title, A Russian Jack the Ripper Suspect and Other Theories. And one of you guys wrote into the comments section on the episode that I did on another suspect, Louis Deemschutz, saying that they thought Louis Deemschutz and the crew that was working with him was a credible Jack the Ripper theory. Louis Deemschutz becomes, well, he becomes a suspect for various reasons, but there's one Ripperologist who has a book out called Sherlock Holmes in the Autumn of Terror, and that's written by Randy Williams. And one thing that Randy Williams said on Jack the Ripper Tour was that he believes that the person in the cane composite, the person's face who has been carved into that wooden cane, is not Dr. Alexander Pedachenko, but it is in fact his suspect, Louis Deemschutz, who, as I understand, was a Russian Jew as well, even though he doesn't have the most Russian-sounding name. So the next point is that someone in the comment section was saying that I was being very critical of Randy Williams, but they thought that his theory involving Louis Deemschutz, and as well as a group of other anarchists living in London being responsible for the Ripper crimes, was somewhat of a solid theory. And I want to give credit where credit is due, because I don't know who Jack the Ripper was, and I can't tell you every aspect of it. And there are definitely some strong points that Randy Williams makes in his Louis Deemschutz theories, and most notably, there are at least two other strong participants in it. Louis Deemschutz is more like the manager of the group, and the mastermind of it would have actually been Peter Kropotkin, and Isaac Kozabrowski was someone who did the majority of the ripping, and Samuel Friedman would have also been responsible for at least the murder of Catherine Eddowes, so it's a group. But the strongest point that I think Randy Williams makes is about the Theotokos nights, and that is that some nights of Jack the Ripper's activity match up with the Theotokos nights from the Eastern Orthodox Church, and the murder of Annie Chapman took place on September 8th, which is one of the feasts of the Holy Theotokos, Theotokos meaning Mother of God, and the double event, the murders of Liz Stride and Catherine Eddowes, took place on September 30th of 1888, and September 30th is the night of the Most Holy Theotokos, and I even went back and looked at some church websites and saw that all of this seemed to match up, and I was like, that goes into the category of, he's on to something. I'm not exactly sure what, but he is on to something. The big disagreement that I would have with Randy Williams, although he knows a lot more about the Ripper case than I do, is that he incorporates the murders of Emma Smith, Martha Tabrum, and Rose Mylett into this anarchist group of murderers. He believes that Emma Smith, Martha Tabrum, and Rose Mylett were all victims of the same group of killers. And as I've stated very clearly in this episode, I am not seeing an ounce of Ripper connection to the murder of Emma Smith. And it goes so far beyond just one Ripperologist, because at the time, there was a lot of talk about this. The newspapers were also trying to make this link between Emma Smith and the other victims. I'd actually like to just read something that had been shared on her own Wikipedia page about that. Although elements of the press linked her death to later murders, which were blamed on a single serial killer known as Jack the Ripper, her murder is unlikely to be connected with the later killings, with the exception of Walter Dew, who said that he thought that Smith was one of the first victims of Jack the Ripper. The police suspected that it was the work of an unrelated criminal gang. Smith either refused or could not describe her attackers in any form of detail, possibly because she feared reprisal. So firstly, one of the people who was an investigator at the time, member of law enforcement Walter Dew, thought that there was a connection to the murder of Emma Smith, but that particular detail is also very interesting, because it's that Emma Smith might not have given descriptions of her attackers because perhaps she didn't recall she was beaten severely, or also because she thought that she was going to live. She may not have realized that she was as close to death as she was, and she was again afraid for her life. But at the same time, Walter Dew seems like someone who is involved in a lot of different true crime events himself, and I particularly found that he was involved with something called the Dr. Crippen case, and that was just a very large manhunt that was involved for someone of that name, Dr. Howley Crippen, actually, and I'm probably going to be exploring that one in a larger Anything Goes Friday segment. If I could restate his observation, it is more or less that there was some type of connection between Emma Smith and Jack the Ripper, and that people were withholding knowledge, and that created a cause for suspicion. I want to examine these pieces of information, and to look at why would somebody do that? Why would somebody commit a crime in the spring of 1888 and then not act again until August, even if it's August 6th or August 31st of 1888? Why? Well, it could be because someone wasn't planning the first murder. Many serial killers commit a crime, and the first crime is not something that is meant been meant to be taken as far as murder, and Emma Smith lived after her injuries. Now, another point could be someone was trying to commit a crime and see how people would respond to it. Would they get caught or not? Or maybe they only thought it was going to be a one-off, or they didn't even know that Emma Smith was going to die. And then that filled the person with bloodlust, and they were fighting these types of urges for several months. Then August 1888 comes around, and somebody murders Martha Tabrum, and then this person realizes that they can commit murders without getting caught. So this launches Jack the Ripper's reign of terror, where the crimes are committed, this person realizes that they can outsmart the authorities, or they're going to commit murders and hide in plain sight, more or less, and they're going to get away with it. That's how this theory that could unite all of the crimes could take shape. Now, I definitely lean toward the former about how Martha Tabrum, Emma Smith, and even Rose Millet, who was strangled on December 20th of 1888, I lean toward those not being the same perpetrator, but only because I think there is insufficient evidence to say so. And if you would like to dispute that with me in the comment section, you can put your ideas down below. What do you think about everything? And what do you think about the murders of Emma Smith, Martha Tabrum, or any of the other possible Whitechapel victims? There are more than 10 Whitechapel murders, but Emma Smith is regarded as the first. I'm not really seeing an enormous amount of Ripper activity, but no matter what, she didn't deserve to die the way she did. Rest in peace to her, as well as Martha Tabrum, as well as all the victims of the Whitechapel murders. And I would love to read your responses in the comments section down below. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And there is always BlackBoxNid88 over on Instagram. And I will see you over there for the bonus podcast. Until next time.